This is your story.
Research shows that people who know how to use silence strategically are perceived as more intelligent, more charismatic, and more trustworthy in social settings. But how do they actually do it? Many people assume that speaking effectively is the most powerful tool in the social world. And to be fair, that's not entirely wrong, but it is incomplete. Because there's a crucial element that's often overlooked. In this age of hypercommunication, where constant expression, verbal clarity, and externalization of thought are celebrated, the transformative power of silence, of saying less, has been quietly devalued, right? But when we look at this through the lens of neuroscience, we find that the brain responds far more profoundly to something other than the flow of words. Unexpected silence. A 2013 study found that silence has a calming and restructuring effect on the brain. Just 2 minutes of intentional silence can stimulate neurogenesis in the hippocampus, the formation of new neurons. The hippocampus is like a neural archive responsible for creating mental maps and storing experiential memory. In that sense, silence is the moment when mental noise fades and learning begins. In this video, we'll explore why speaking less, when used strategically, can sometimes be more persuasive than the act of speaking itself. Because silence activates the subconscious mind of the listener, it creates space that they instinctively fill. When you stop speaking, the other person begins to wonder what you're thinking. And that's precisely what keeps their attention focused on you. As the psychoanalyst Carl Jung once said, silence is the only place where one can hear the deepest truths within. Speaking less is not just a social behavior. It's a form of conscious regulation, a kind of subtle manipulation, what we might call white manipulation. And when used wisely, it sends powerful signals of respect, confidence, and emotional intelligence. This is especially true in relationships. Many people, particularly in close connections, use words as a kind of defense mechanism. We try to persuade through speech. We operate under an inner equation that says, the better I explain myself, the more I'll be understood. But this logic doesn't hold in deep emotional bonds. Because in relationships, you don't truly influence someone with your words. You influence them with your presence. The key to powerful communication is not always in what's said, but in what's heard. The real power in any relationship lies in making the other person feel heard. And that feeling can only emerge in silence. True listening creates space, a psychological opening, where the other person begins to feel safe enough to be vulnerable. In that sense, it's not when you're speaking, but when you're silent that you begin to truly connect. Psychologist Carl Rogers once defined empathic communication this way. When someone really hears you without passing judgment, without trying to take responsibility for you, it feels damn good. Silence, in this context, becomes a form of affirmation. It's the wordless way of saying, right now, I'm completely here with you. And for the other person, that doesn't just mean being noticed, it means being valued. Because when you fall silent, you don't withdraw your attention. You go deeper into their world. That's the most intimate layer of connection. Modern psychology calls this active silence. In emotionally charged moments, especially those involving conflict, vulnerability, or relational tension, choosing not to speak and instead listening with presence actually increases trust. It activates the empathy circuits in the brain and offers a psychologically safe space. And it's within that space that true expression happens while defensive walls begin to fall. Contrary to what most people believe, the true transformative power in a relationship doesn't come from speaking. It comes from creating space for others to speak. And the door to that space isn't opened through words. It's opened through silence. Elon Musk has emphasized in several interviews that what brought him to where he is today wasn't fast talking, but deep thinking, and more importantly, strategic silence. In high-pressure decision-making moments, he takes intentional pauses to filter and process information. Under conditions of cognitive overload, silence acts as a neurological reset. I don't find answers by talking them out loud. I retrieve them from within, Musk says, revealing that silence is not passivity, but a form of internal computation, a high-energy cognitive process at work. Jordan Peterson, in his book 12 Rules for Life, speaks about silence as a form of personal discipline. To him, choosing to be silent before speaking is a psychological act of filtering one's thoughts. Thinking before speaking is the mathematics of personality, he writes. Peterson presents silence not only as a strategy, but as a moral stance. If you're not ready to say what's right, learn to stay silent. In that sense, silence becomes both a tool of communication and an ethical position.
Don't don't forget to subscribe.
The paradox is this: the more people talk, the more likely they are to unintentionally reveal parts of themselves, not just through their words, but through their unfiltered inner state. Because the brain, in its effort to maintain verbal output, gradually lowers its internal filter. And every sentence spoken without proper thought carries the risk of exposing mental gaps. These gaps are often interpreted socially as incompetence. Okay? Psychologist Susan Fisk's theory of social cognition suggests that people evaluate others based on two core dimensions: competence and warmth. When you speak on a topic you don't fully understand, you risk losing the first, competence. But silence, when used wisely, becomes a powerful strategy, because the human mind has a natural tendency to fill in gaps. When it doesn't know, it assumes, and in the absence of information, it often fills in with respect. As the German philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer once put it, a man who does not speak has the chance to hide his foolishness. But one who speaks too much is sure to reveal it. In this way, speaking less is not just a sign of courtesy, it's a form of perception management. In social psychology literature, this is referred to as the silence effect. Especially in leadership studies, individuals who speak less are more likely to be perceived as charismatic, wise, and self-assured, which means it's not just how much you speak that defines you, it's also when you choose not to. There's a striking detail in the Netflix documentary about Osho, moments where he takes a vow of silence, withdrawing from speech for days at a time. To someone unfamiliar with his psychology, this quietness can easily be perceived as a sign of spiritual maturity, mystical depth, or even intuitive leadership. Okay? But from a clinical psychology perspective, such silence can sometimes reflect underdeveloped emotional structures, a self shaped by impulse, or even sophisticated manipulative strategies. And that's where it gets interesting. The human brain often interprets silence as intentional, even profound, and responds with admiration. A silent figure is quickly transformed into a wise one in the realm of social perception. In social psychology, this is known as the halo effect, the tendency to generalize a single perceived positive trait, like silence, into a broad assumption of overall excellence. A person who simply listens and smiles is often assumed to understand us deeply, intuitively sense our emotions, or even read our minds. As Carl Jung once said, silence is not just absence. It is a space where meaning concentrates, right? Filmmaker Christopher Nolan understands this power intimately. In movies like Interstellar and Dunkirk, he masterfully uses silence to carry emotional weight. In Dunkirk, there's a famous scene where, for nearly a full minute, there's no music, no dialogue, just silence. And yet, that silence elevates the viewer's heart rate. It shows that silence, when used at the right moment, can speak louder than a symphony. In life, too, a well-placed pause can hold more meaning than pages of conversation. Indeed, silence functions like a mental projector. People project onto it what they most want to see. And often, we form impressions of others, not based on what they say, but on what they leave unsaid. Sometimes, that impression becomes more powerful than the reality. Of course, the goal here isn't to manipulate others or to construct a false image of wisdom, but if your aim is to leave a deeper impression on people and to communicate beyond words, then you need to learn how to use silence consciously. Sometimes, simply choosing not to speak or just offering a calm smile can significantly enhance your presence. In psychotherapy, this is known as therapist silence, the act of holding space by remaining quiet so that the client can open up to their inner world. Most people romanticize the idea of silence, in theory, but in practice, they find real silence profoundly uncomfortable. Okay? That's because silence quickly redirects the mind toward its own inner voice. A 2015 study at Harvard University by Anderson and colleagues revealed that extended silence during social interactions increases self-awareness and activates psychological defense mechanisms. In practice, this plays out clearly when a client shares a traumatic but emotionally suppressed event and you simply ask, "How did that affect you?" Then allow the silence to hang in the air. The tension begins to build. 5 seconds, 10 seconds, 30 seconds. The silence becomes heavy and the person starts to feel an urge to fill it. As discomfort grows, they begin to express the emotions they originally wanted to avoid. This is how silence becomes a guide. I once had a client who skimmed over a traumatic memory as if it were trivial. I said nothing. I maintained eye contact and stayed completely silent. We sat in that silence for about 20 seconds. Then he suddenly said, "Actually, I still relive that moment every night." The silence gave him space. Because I didn't speak, he could.
Don't forget to subscribe.
In such moments, silence is not manipulation. It becomes a call towards something existential. Friedrich Nietzsche described it perfectly. Silence is the space where the deepest questions echo. That's exactly what therapist silence does. It patiently waits for that echo to rise from within. The power of silence is not limited to therapeutic settings. It can also be observed in everyday life and professional interactions. For example, during a job interview, there's a common dynamic. The interviewer asks you a question, you respond, and then they say nothing. That pause creates an uncomfortable space in your mind, a silence that compels you to speak more, to fill the void. But this, in many cases, is a deliberate strategy, and you can use the same method in social settings. When you ask someone a question, especially someone you're trying to get to know, allowing 15 to 20 seconds of silence doesn't pressure them. It actually creates space for deeper, more instinctive expression. On a cognitive level, this kind of silence invites reflection and psychological depth. There's another truth worth noting. People who talk constantly about their goals often take less action. But why is that? Do they talk more because they're stuck? Or are they stuck because they talk too much? Psychological studies support the second. A 2009 study at New York University found that people who frequently share their goals experience a premature sense of reward, a kind of emotional gratification just from receiving social acknowledgement. As a result, their motivation to take actual steps toward that goal weakens. The brain feels it has already succeeded, so it stops moving. That's why people who keep their plans private tend to be more consistent in execution. So if you have big dreams, protect them. Silence becomes both your shield and your fuel. As Confucius once said, "Great minds talk about ideas. Wise minds live them." Another context where silence can be a powerful tool is when someone directs a question at you. There are times when you know your answer won't sound impressive. And in those moments, instead of rushing to respond, try holding a 10 to 15 second pause, maintaining eye contact with calm confidence. This not only gives you space to think, it also sends strong nonverbal signals of intelligence and composure. A 2017 study published in Harvard Business Review showed that brief pauses before answering were linked to perceptions of the speaker as more strategic, intelligent, and decisive. The brain rewards conscious processing, not automatic reactions. On the flip side, the more you over-explain, the more the listener's perception of your credibility tends to decline. In social psychology, this is called the verbal dilution effect. When too many words dilute the strength of the message, therefore, learning to express yourself with fewer, more intentional words isn't just efficient communication, it's a signal of personal value. As Confucius put it, the wise man thinks before he speaks. The fool believes that speaking means thinking. When you speak less and say more, it adds not only to what you say, but to who you are. Thank you for listening, beautiful soul. The comment section is your space. Sometimes a single sentence can change someone's entire day, whether it's your silence, your insight, or simply a quiet, "I'm here," let it be heard below. And if you enjoyed this conversation, don't forget to like the video and subscribe so we can meet again in the next one.